What if I told you that the man who seems most indifferent to you is actually fighting the hardest battle of his life, a battle he refuses to admit even to himself? What if his silence isn't emptiness, but the sound of emotions he's terrified to feel? What if the distance you interpret as disinterest is actually the clearest proof that you've become his weakness? Most people completely misunderstand the way men respond when they are emotionally overwhelmed. They expect obvious pursuit, constant messaging, bold expressions of affection. But when a man realizes that someone has the power to break through his defenses, power to touch the deepest and most unguarded parts of him, his instinct is not always to run toward her. Sometimes his instinct is to retreat, not to escape her, but to protect himself from the intensity of what he feels. Carl Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." And for many men, emotional awareness is exactly that, painful, because for the first time, they are confronted with feelings they cannot control or rationalize, feelings that shake the foundation of the identity they've built around strength, composure, independence, and emotional self-regulation. They are suddenly no longer the man who controls everything. They are the man whose heartbeat betrays him every time she walks into the room. The truth that no one talks about is this: when you become someone's weakness, their behavior stops making logical sense. They become inconsistent. Their actions contradict their words. Their attempts to resist you become louder than any confession could ever be. And they will try with everything in them to pretend that you don't affect them, that they're unaffected, unbothered, immune. But the harder they try to look indifferent, the more obvious it becomes that something deeper is happening beneath the surface. He will perform indifference like it's a role he's auditioning for. Suddenly he's too relaxed, too casual. His laugh is a little too effortless. His tone a little too smooth. His distance a little too intentional. This isn't confidence. It's camouflage. It's a performance powered by fear. Because somewhere in his mind, a quiet voice is whispering, "If I let her in, I might lose myself. If I let her see how much she matters, she might destroy me without even trying." And this fear isn't about you doing something wrong. It's about what you represent. You have become the one person who could reach into the places he has spent his entire life keeping locked and armored. You have become the mirror he's afraid to look into. You have become the risk he cannot afford emotionally, but also cannot walk away from completely. Carl Jung said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." And that is exactly what happens when you become a man's emotional weakness. He avoids, not because you don't matter, but because you matter too much. He distances himself not because he wants less, but because he feels too much. He convinces himself he's strong enough to resist you, not because there is no chemistry, but because that chemistry threatens to burn through every wall he's built. He has spent years learning to stay controlled, composed, untouchable. The world taught him that vulnerability equals danger, that emotions are liabilities, that his value is measured in how well he suppresses whatever hurts. So when he meets someone who bypasses all his defenses without effort, his instinct is not surrender, it's protection. His brain says danger, not because you are dangerous, but because what he feels is dangerous to the identity he has spent his life constructing. And so the war begins. The war between the heart that wants to move toward you and the mind that is terrified of what will happen if it does. He thinks distance will dissolve desire. He thinks silence will restore control. He thinks pretending not to care will save him from the unbearable possibility of being seen, known, and loved deeply. But the harder he resists, the more entangled he becomes, because resistance is not the absence of desire. It is the confirmation of intensity. You do not resist something weak, you resist something powerful. His subconscious knows what his conscious mind refuses to admit. You have already entered his emotional world, and he has no idea how to navigate that territory. His instincts betray him constantly. The way his voice shifts when he says your name. The way his energy changes when you walk into the room. The way his attention sharpens when someone else shows interest in you. The way uncertainty flickers in his eyes before he forces himself to look away. Even when he refuses to speak the truth, his body speaks without permission. His posture softens around you even when his face remains neutral. His breathing changes when you come close. His eyes search for you in every room before he tells himself not to look again. Science proves that emotional attraction triggers automatic physiological responses, heart rate elevation, pupil dilation, and nervous system activation, none of which he can control or hide. And yet he tries. He tries to appear unaffected. He tries to speak casually. He tries to act like you're just another person. But every attempt to seem indifferent is proof of the opposite. Because a man who truly doesn't care doesn't need to convince himself or anyone else of anything. Only someone who cares too much needs to pretend he doesn't. Carl Jung once wrote, "What we resist persists." And that is the paradox he now lives inside. The more he fights his feelings, the stronger they become. The more distance he creates, the more he feels your absence. The more he tries to erase you from his mind, the more you take up space he cannot reclaim. His resistance becomes obsession. His silence becomes longing. His distance becomes torment. You didn't force your way into his heart. You simply existed, and that existence awakened parts of him he thought were dead or never knew existed. And now every time he tries to walk away, something pulls him back. Not desire for romance, not physical attraction, something deeper, something primal, something terrifying, something he does not have language for. And what happens next is where the story becomes even more compelling. Because eventually resistance stops working. Eventually, his emotional defenses start to crack in ways he cannot control. Eventually, his behavior reveals the truth he swore he would never admit. Eventually, the battle he fights with himself becomes unbearable. And when that moment comes, everything changes. But before the moment of collapse, the moment when his defenses finally crack, something else begins to happen. His behavior shifts subtly, almost invisibly. He starts to protect himself not from you, but from the intensity of what he feels when he is near you. He begins to create distance in quiet, calculated ways, not because he wants space, but because he fears what will happen if he doesn't. He starts managing his exposure to you like someone carefully handling fire. Not enough to burn, but never fully extinguished. He won't disappear completely because he can't. Something in him refuses to let go, but he also won't allow himself to stand too close. So instead, he exists in a fragile in-between space, neither here nor gone, neither pursuing nor withdrawing fully. A constant emotional limbo. You might notice he becomes mysteriously unavailable in moments where the connection between you could deepen. He'll avoid being alone with you. He'll show up late or leave early at gatherings where he knows you'll be present. He'll redirect conversations the moment they start becoming personal or intimate. He will insist on a surface level tone even when you can feel the depth pushing beneath it. This isn't randomness. It's survival, because he knows that too much time with you would destroy the final thread of control he's clinging to. He knows that if he lets himself relax fully in your presence, everything he's trying to hide will come pouring out. The vulnerability, the softness, the craving, the truth. And that terrifies him far more than losing you ever could. He fears the version of himself that exists when he lets his guard down. The version that feels uncontrollably drawn to you. The version that would abandon all logic and fall entirely. He fears the dependency that love creates. He fears the exposure that closeness demands. He fears becoming transparent when he has spent his entire life wearing armor. So instead of chasing you, he steels himself against you. He begins constructing emotional strategies, consciously or unconsciously, to maintain distance. He keeps conversations short. He avoids lingering. He chooses safety over authenticity. His words remain measured, controlled, calculated. He will pretend not to notice you, even when every cell in his body is aware of your presence. He will force himself to look past you even when his instincts are screaming to turn toward you. And yet, even in those carefully orchestrated attempts to appear unaffected, cracks begin to show. A subtle tremor in his voice when he says your name. A slight pause before answering when you speak to him. A flicker in his eyes he tries to suppress. A stiffness in his posture that wasn't there before. He becomes hyper-controlled, and in that control, you can feel the chaos he's trying to contain. Because every time he tries to push you away, something pulls him back. Something ancient. Something instinctive. Something he cannot rationalize or master. His emotional resistance becomes a silent confession. Psychologists call this cognitive dissonance. The mental war that erupts when someone's actions don't align with their feelings. And it's one of the most painful internal conflicts a person can experience. The more he tries to suppress his emotions for you, the stronger and more disruptive those emotions become. He knows that avoiding you protects him, but avoiding you also hurts him. So he becomes trapped in a cycle he cannot escape. A cycle of withdrawal and return, distance and nearness, coldness and warmth, silencing and slipping. He is constantly fighting himself, and no matter which side he chooses, he loses. Because distancing himself from you feels like losing oxygen, and being close to you feels like losing control. This is why his behavior becomes inconsistent. One day he might seem distant, cold, unreachable. The next day he might surprise you with softness, unexpected attention, or sudden sincerity. That's not manipulation. That's emotional overwhelm. That's his heart breaking through the walls faster than he can rebuild them. He doesn't know how to balance the intensity of what he feels. So he swings between extremes, trying to regain equilibrium. He will try to detach, but the detachment won't hold. He will try to seem unaffected, but his eyes will betray him. He will try to ignore you, but the silence will drive him mad. He will try to erase you, but your presence will haunt him in every quiet moment. He might even attempt to convince himself that he doesn't need you, that it's better to walk away. He might distract himself with work, accomplishments, or even other people, not because he wants them, but because he's trying to numb what he feels for you. But nothing satisfies him, nothing fills the space, nothing silences the ache, because once someone reaches the deepest emotional layer, no substitute can replace them. He will feel jealousy stronger than he knows how to handle. He will feel protectiveness that surprises him. He will feel fear of losing you even before he has the right to. He will feel anger at himself for caring so much. He will feel confusion about why he can't just move on. He will feel drawn to you even when he begs himself not to be. And slowly, without meaning to, he begins exposing himself in subtle, unguarded ways. He starts remembering details about you he shouldn't logically remember. He brings up moments you thought he forgot. He notices changes in you that other people overlook. He reacts emotionally to things involving you, even when he tries to hide it. And all of it reveals one truth he is terrified to accept. You have gotten under his skin. You live inside his mind. You occupy space he cannot reclaim. There is a moment every time where he catches himself thinking about you and immediately shuts down the thought. He panics at the depth of it. He tries to slam the door. He tries to undo the attachment, but it's too late, because emotional connection doesn't ask permission. It attacks without warning. It rewrites someone's world from the inside out. And the harder he tries to reject the connection, the more powerful it becomes. At night, when everything is quiet and he isn't performing strength for the world, his guard weakens. That's when your memory hits him hardest. That's when the what-ifs haunt him. That's when he realizes how deeply he feels. That's when resistance becomes pain, and eventually something inside him will break. Not in a dramatic moment, but slowly, quietly, inevitably, because no one can outrun themselves forever. And when that breaking point comes, it begins revealing itself through something he can't control at all. His body. His physical reactions start exposing the truth he's trying to hide. And that's where everything begins to unravel. And this is where the truth can no longer hide behind silence or distance, because the body always speaks first. Even when the mind is determined to remain guarded, the body betrays what the heart is trying to conceal. And when you become someone's emotional weakness, his physical responses begin revealing everything he refuses to say aloud. His body changes around you in ways he can't control. His breathing shifts, his heartbeat quickens, his nervous system activates. He becomes hyper-aware of your presence, even when he tries to appear relaxed and unfazed. You might notice how he positions himself in a room, not directly beside you, but never too far. The kind of distance that looks accidental but is calculated with precision. He stays close enough to feel you, but far enough to pretend he's unaffected. His feet point toward you even when his torso turns away. His shoulders angle in your direction even when his eyes avoid contact. His body acts like a compass that keeps returning to its true north, no matter how hard he tries to redirect it. These micro-movements are not conscious actions. They are driven by instinct, and instinct tells the truth before the mind decides how to respond. Then there are the moments when he's caught off guard, when your presence surprises him or when he's too tired to perform indifference. For a second, he lets himself look at you freely. And in that fraction of time, everything he feels becomes unmistakable. The softness in his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the breath he forgets to breathe. And then, almost instantly, he exits the moment, looking away, clearing his throat, adjusting his posture, regaining the performance. That quick pullback is not a rejection. It's panic. It's the internal alarm that says, "You're losing control. Shut it down." Eye contact becomes the battlefield where his heart and his mind wage war. When he looks at you, there is depth. Too much depth. A lingering intensity he is afraid to sustain. And so he looks away too quickly. He speaks without looking at you for too long. He glances just long enough to feel the connection, but not long enough for you to see through him. Because he knows that if he holds your gaze for more than a few seconds, the truth will spill out through his eyes. His voice changes too. He might speak a little softer, slower, lower, or his tone becomes overly controlled, deliberately monotone, as if he's pushing all the emotion out of it. But the voice is one of the hardest things to mask, because emotional activation physically alters vocal resonance, so even if the words are calm, the sound carries a tremor. And there's more. The unconscious touches, the way he adjusts his collar, touches his face, runs his hand through his hair, fidgets with something in his hands. These are displacement actions, the body's way of releasing emotional tension. He's trying to self-regulate because your presence overwhelms his nervous system. That's why he shifts his weight, changes positions frequently, becomes restless. His body is trying to contain something too powerful to sit still. There are moments when he leans closer unconsciously, just a few inches, but enough to feel like gravity changed direction. And when he realizes it, he pulls back sharply. That pullback is not rejection. It is fear of exposure. You become the test between who he pretends to be and who he truly is. His protective instincts also reveal themselves. He will stand closer when there are crowds. He will subtly place himself between you and discomfort. He will slow his pace to match yours, offer help before you ask, or observe you quietly to ensure you're okay. These gestures require no words. They come from instinct, not intention, because even when he's resisting intimacy, he cannot resist protecting you. And the most revealing sign of all, when someone else shows interest in you, his entire energy shifts. His posture stiffens. His expression darkens for a moment he tries to control. His attention sharpens. Even if he says nothing, you can feel the atmosphere change instantly. Not because he's possessive, but because the thought of losing you exposes the depth of his attachment in a way nothing else can. Jealousy is not always loud. Sometimes it's a silence thick enough to feel. A silence that says, "I wish I didn't care this much." But perhaps the most haunting part of all is the emotional disturbance that begins to rise inside him. You don't just affect his actions. You disrupt his internal world. You challenge his emotional equilibrium. You break the pattern he thought he mastered. Suddenly, the coping mechanisms he's used his whole life stop working. He used to rely on logic, detachment, control, but logic cannot silence longing. Detachment cannot erase connection, and control cannot cage instinct. Not anymore. He begins reacting more intensely to things involving you than anything else in his life. Hearing your name affects him differently. Seeing you with others hits him harder than he expects. Feeling distance from you becomes painful in ways he cannot explain. Your sadness affects him. Your silence hurts him. Your happiness makes him unexpectedly light. And none of it makes sense to him, because it violates everything he thought he understood about emotional control. He might get irritated more easily around Not because he's frustrated with you, but because he's frustrated with himself. Every emotion you trigger is amplified. Every interaction leaves an imprint that lasts longer than it should. Every goodbye feels heavier than he wants to admit. His emotional responses become unpredictable, intense, unfiltered. And the reason is simple. You bypassed his emotional defenses without asking permission. You didn't break his armor. You slipped through the gaps. You saw the parts of him he never intended to share. You reached a depth he never planned to reveal. And now he is terrified, not of you, but of what loving you might do to him. At night, when the world is quiet and there is no performance left to maintain, that's when the truth suffocates him. His resistance turns into restlessness. His thoughts circle back to you relentlessly. He tries to distract himself, but nothing works. You invade his mind like a pulse he cannot silence. The memories replay. The conversations repeat. The moments he tried to ignore haunt him more intensely. And suddenly he is no longer at war with you. He is at war with himself. He realizes he is losing control. And that realization terrifies him more than any heartbreak ever could. Because losing control means surrender. And surrender means vulnerability. And vulnerability means risk. And risk means pain. So he freezes. He hesitates. He retreats. He watches from a distance because watching feels safer than participating. But every second of distance burns. Every silence becomes torture. Every missed moment becomes regret. And regret has a way of cracking even the strongest armor. Because eventually, the pain of holding back becomes greater than the fear of letting go. Eventually, the pressure inside him reaches a breaking point. Eventually, his emotional walls begin to crumble under the weight of everything he refuses to say. And that's when the shift begins. The shift from resistance to revelation. The shift from hiding to exposure. The shift from fear to inevitability. And when that moment arrives, everything changes. Not slowly, not gently, but all at once. Because no one can run forever from the truth written in their own heartbeat. And in that breaking point lies the beginning of something he can no longer suppress, something powerful, raw, and unavoidable. Something that will rewrite his entire world. And this is where the unraveling begins, not outside, but inside him. Because the most intense transformations don't happen when someone acts, but when they can no longer escape their own thoughts. When a man reaches the point where resistance no longer protects him, the battlefield shifts from body language to the mind. That's when obsession quietly takes root. Not in a dramatic explosion, but like a slow, steady current pulling him deeper beneath the surface. Thoughts of you stop being occasional. They become constant. They infiltrate the ordinary moments of his day. They interrupt his focus. They steal his attention even when he tries to drown them in work, distractions, or routine. He finds himself thinking about what you're doing, where you are, who you're with, and whether someone else is seeing the version of you he pushes himself to stay away from. And the more he tries to force these thoughts out, the stronger they return. Because suppression is gasoline, not water. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." And that is exactly what begins happening inside him. The more he resists you, the more powerful your presence becomes in his mind. You become the unfinished sentence, the unresolved feeling, the unanswered question. Something in him begins demanding resolution, and that demand becomes louder every time he tells himself to ignore it. He finds himself replaying old moments with you, conversations, glances, laughter, even silence. He remembers things he didn't know he memorized, the way your voice shifts when you're excited, the expression in your eyes when you're hiding sadness, the rhythm of your breathing when you're thinking. He replays them as if searching for meaning he couldn't see before, as if hoping clarity might save him from himself. He begins imagining future conversations you haven't had yet, things he wishes he'd said, things he wants to say now but can't bring himself to speak. Imagination becomes his refuge and his prison, because in imagination he can be honest. In reality, he still hides behind the armor he hasn't learned to remove. The conflict between desire and fear intensifies until it becomes unbearable. The mind that once felt like safety now feels like a cage. He tries to rationalize his feelings, tries to explain them away, dissect them. Fight them! But logic becomes useless against the emotional gravity pulling him under. And gravity always wins. That's when the emotional turbulence starts showing up in unexpected ways. He becomes quieter around you, not because he's uninterested, but because he's overwhelmed. Conversation feels dangerous, silence feels revealing, even friendliness feels like surrender. He begins avoiding eye contact, not because he doesn't want to look at you, but because he's afraid of what you'll see if he does. He avoids physical closeness not because he doesn't crave it, but because he's terrified of what closeness will unlock. And yet, despite all the fear, he finds himself missing you in a way he can't explain. Not just missing your presence, but missing the feeling of himself when he's near you. The version of him that feels more alive, more connected, more real. The version he didn't know existed until you brought it to the surface. He realizes that the distance meant to protect him is destroying him instead. The silence meant to help him regain control is consuming him. The withdrawal that was supposed to keep him safe is hollowing him out from the inside. He starts noticing the emptiness in places that used to feel full. His achievements feel less meaningful. His routines feel like noise. The distractions he used to depend on stop working. He becomes emotionally restless, mentally exhausted, spiritually unsettled. He senses that something is missing. Not something, someone. And the realization terrifies him more than any vulnerability ever could. He needs you, not in a superficial way, not in a romantic fantasy, in a way that reaches into the deepest part of his soul. He tries to reason his way out of it, reminding himself of the risks, rejection, disappointment, loss, exposure, but every rational argument collapses under the weight of emotional truth, because he realizes something he never expected. Losing you without ever trying is worse than risking everything and breaking. And that realization breaks the foundation he's stood on his entire life. It forces him to confront something he's avoided since long before he met. You, his fear of intimacy, his fear of dependence, his fear of being seen. He begins recognizing that the walls he built to protect himself have become the walls that imprison him. For the first time, he begins questioning everything he believed about strength. Maybe emotional distance isn't strength at all. Maybe silence isn't safety. Maybe control isn't protection. Maybe vulnerability isn't weakness, it's courage. Maybe love isn't danger, it's transformation. He begins understanding that you were never the threat. You were the catalyst. You didn't break him. You exposed what was already broken. You didn't weaken him. You revealed where he was already hurting. You didn't create the conflict. You awakened the truth. And now he finds himself facing a crossroads. Continue fighting a war he cannot win, or surrender to what his heart has already chosen. His breaking point doesn't come with drama. It comes in a quiet moment, like all turning points do. Maybe it's something small, like seeing you laugh with someone else, or hearing your name unexpectedly, or scrolling past an old photo. Maybe it's the sudden fear of never experiencing the connection he's been running from. Maybe it's the silence after a day he expected you to reach out and you didn't. Whatever the trigger, it hits him with force he never planned for, and suddenly the thought becomes unbearable. What if I lose her without ever letting her know what she means to me? That single question fractures his resistance. It cracks open the armor he thought would protect him forever. It exposes the truth he's been trying to bury. He doesn't want to be strong without you. He doesn't want control if control means loneliness. He doesn't want distance if distance means regret. And now the fear shifts. It is no longer fear of falling. It is fear of never jumping. Fear of missing the one connection that made him feel alive. Fear of watching you walk into someone else's life while he stayed locked inside his own. Fear of discovering too late that every moment of resistance was a mistake. And in that shift, something miraculous happens. The resistance that once defined him begins dissolving. The walls that once protected him begin crumbling. The silence that once felt safe becomes unbearable. And his heart finally speaks louder than his fear. That is the moment when a man decides he cannot hide anymore. When the truth stops being something to battle and becomes something to surrender to. when he chooses exposure over protection, risk over regret, honesty over silence. And when he reaches that point, everything changes. Because now he is ready not to confess, not to chase, not to impress, but to reveal, to stand unguarded, to speak without armor, to face the vulnerability he spent his life running from. And that is where the story turns. The moment where fear becomes clarity, the moment where silence becomes truth, the moment where his world begins to shift toward you instead of away from you. And what happens next is the most powerful part of all. When a man finally stops fighting his feelings and steps into the truth he's been terrified to face, the entire dynamic transforms. What he does next will change everything. And when that shift finally comes, when he stops running from the truth and turns to face it, it doesn't look like a grand romantic speech or a dramatic moment from a movie. It happens quietly, almost gently, like something fragile unfolding after being held too tightly for too long. When a man reaches the point where the fear of losing you outweighs the fear of being vulnerable, everything inside him rearranges. His energy changes first. The tension that once surrounded him begins to soften. The guardedness that once felt like steel starts to melt. He no longer moves around you like someone trying to avoid danger. Instead, he moves like someone who has just discovered how exhausting avoidance really is. You feel the shift before he even speaks. The atmosphere between you feels different. Warmer, less rigid, more open. The silence is no longer heavy with unspoken fear, but filled with possibility. He begins to show up again, not by accident, but with intention. He stops disappearing into excuses, stops hiding behind rehearsed indifference, stops pretending he doesn't feel what he feels. Instead of avoiding you, he wants to be near you. Instead of shortening conversations, he lets them linger. Instead of holding himself at emotional arm's length, he begins leaning in, not physically only, but emotionally. His communication changes. The guarded short answers become longer. His responses become more thoughtful, more honest, more present. He listens differently now, fully, attentively, without distraction. His questions go deeper. He wants to understand you, not just hear you. And for the first time, he's not afraid to let you understand him in return. The mask he wore, the one built from control and distance, begins to crack. He starts sharing things he once kept hidden. His fears, his mistakes, his insecurities, his hopes. Not because he suddenly becomes fearless, but because he realizes that being understood is more valuable than being protected. He begins trusting you with the parts of himself he never trusted anyone with before. Emotionally, he stops choosing safety over connection. He stops calculating every move. He stops overthinking every word. He stops trying to control the experience and starts allowing himself to feel it. He finally understands that vulnerability isn't a threat, it's an act of profound strength. He realizes that letting someone in is not the same as losing himself. It's the path to becoming more than he was before. He may not say the words immediately. He might still struggle to articulate the depth of what he feels, but his actions become louder than silence ever was. He prioritizes your presence. He reaches out first. He stops running from the difficult conversations. He begins to show consistency instead of chaos. Where there once was hesitation, there is now clarity. Where there once was fear, there is now courage. And then, without planning it, without preparing the perfect timing, without rehearsing, the truth slips out. Maybe not as a dramatic confession, but as something simple and real. Something like, "I can't keep pretending I don't care," or "Being away from you hurts more than anything," or "I was scared of what I feel for you, but I don't want to run anymore." However he says it, it feels raw, unpolished, honest. It comes from a place deeper than words, straight from the heart he fought so hard to silence. He is no longer trying to protect himself from you. He is choosing to trust you instead, and that choice changes everything. He begins showing affection he once suppressed. The way he looks at you now has no hesitation. His eyes don't dart away, they stay. They soften. They speak without words. His body relaxes when you're near. He becomes fully present. The nervous fidgeting fades. The tension dissolves. The energy that once felt fragmented now feels anchored. He becomes attentive to your emotions, not out of obligation, but because he cares. He notices when you're quiet. He checks in when you seem off. He listens not to respond, but to understand. He starts taking responsibility instead of hiding behind pride. He begins building instead of resisting. He shows effort instead of excuses. And suddenly, the man who was terrified of losing control becomes the man who is willing to risk everything. Because he has learned the most important lesson of all. That real connection is worth the fear, worth the risk, worth the vulnerability. He discovers that the walls he built to avoid pain also kept out joy. That protecting himself kept him safe, but also kept him alone. That surrendering to emotion didn't weaken him, it freed him. He realizes that love isn't something you hold back from. It's something you step into. It's not about avoiding heartbreak. It's about embracing the chance to feel something extraordinary. In that moment, he finally understands what Carl Jung meant when he said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And he is transformed, not into someone new, but into someone real, someone whole, someone honest, someone alive. And he sees you differently now, not as a threat to his control, but as the person who awakened a version of himself he never knew existed. Now that the war inside him is over, he no longer needs distance, silence, or resistance. He needs truth. He needs presence. He needs connection. He needs you, not as a weakness, but as a choice, as a partner, as something sacred. And that is the moment everything turns. When a man stops fighting love and starts embracing it, he becomes unstoppable. Fear becomes devotion. Silence becomes expression. Distance becomes closeness. Confusion becomes clarity. He no longer hides the depth of how he feels. He stands in it. He no longer fears losing himself. He finds himself. He no longer sees you as danger. He sees you as home. That is the power of becoming someone's greatest vulnerability. Someone's emotional turning point, someone's transformation. It was never about breaking him. It was about breaking him open. And now, the love he once feared becomes the love he is ready to fight for. Because once a man chooses you with a full heart, with no armor and no resistance, nothing is more powerful. He begins showing affection he once suppressed. The way he looks at you now has no hesitation. His eyes don't dart away, they stay. They soften. They speak without words. His body relaxes when you're near. He becomes fully present. The nervous fidgeting fades. The tension dissolves. The energy that once felt fragmented now feels anchored. He becomes attentive to your emotions, not out of obligation, but because he cares. He notices when you're quiet. He checks in when you seem off. He listens not to respond, but to understand. He starts taking responsibility instead of hiding behind pride. He begins building instead of resisting. He shows effort instead of excuses. And suddenly, the man who was terrified of losing control becomes the man who is willing to risk everything. Because he has learned the most important lesson of all. That real connection is worth the fear, worth the risk, worth the vulnerability. He discovers that the walls he built to avoid pain also kept out joy. That protecting himself kept him safe, but also kept him alone. That surrendering to emotion didn't weaken him, it freed him. He realizes that love isn't something you hold back from. It's something you step into. It's not about avoiding heartbreak. It's about embracing the chance to feel something extraordinary. In that moment, he finally understands what Carl Jung meant when he said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." And he is transformed, not into someone new, but into someone real, someone whole, someone honest, someone alive. And he sees you differently now, not as a threat to his control, but as the person who awakened a version of himself he never knew existed. Now that the war inside him is over, he no longer needs distance, silence, or resistance. He needs truth. He needs presence. He needs connection. He needs you, not as a weakness, but as a choice, as a partner, as something sacred. And that is the moment everything turns. When a man stops fighting love and starts embracing it, he becomes unstoppable. Fear becomes devotion. Silence becomes expression. Distance becomes closeness. Confusion becomes clarity. He no longer hides the depth of how he feels. He stands in it. He no longer fears losing himself. He finds himself. He no longer sees you as danger. He sees you as home. That is the power of becoming someone's greatest vulnerability, someone's emotional turning point, someone's transformation. It was never about breaking him. It was about breaking him open. And now, the love he once feared becomes the love he is ready to fight for. Because once a man chooses you with a full heart, with no armor and no resistance, nothing is more powerful.